Hello and welcome to the Heaven Bound Sunday School class at the First General Baptist Church in Truman. We will read scripture from Genesis chapter 32. The lesson concerns Jacob and the changing of his name from Jacob to Israel. Now we've studied about Abraham and we've studied about Isaac, who was Abraham's son. Of course, Jacob was the twin brother of Esau. They were sons of Isaac. Last week we discussed how Jacob bought Esau's birthright from him, with a little bit of trickery. Later on, he also got his blessing for the firstborn. Esau was firstborn, and Jacob got that blessing. And whatever kind of relationship they had at that point is pretty well destroyed, and Esau even threatened Jacob. And so, with the help of his mother, Jacob fled the area because he was in fear for his life. He went to live with his uncle Laban. While there, he got a little bit of karma, I guess. What goes around comes around. He was always into trickery and scheming. He fell in love with Rachel, the daughter of Laban, and he asked for her hand in marriage. And Laban said, "Yes, you can have my daughter's hand in marriage, but you need to work 7 years for that." And of course, Jacob did that. And after 7 years, Laban said, "Well, the daughter I had in mind was Leah. So if you also want Rachel, you have to work another 7 years." And so that's what Jacob did. So he got a little bit of his own medicine. Later, Jacob and Laban quarreled. God told Jacob that he needed to return to his homeland and to his family. And so Jacob proceeded to do that. And on the way back home, he found out that Esau was coming towards him with 400 men. With Jacob, knowing what he had done to his brother Esau over the years, knowing what Esau said to him the last time they saw one another, he got scared. He wound up dividing his camp of the people that was returning with him to his home, sent them in two different directions, hoping somehow they could, at least one group could get past Esau. He also sent gifts ahead to Esau with a message to his brother that the gifts were for him and they were coming from his servant Jacob. And that leads us up to our scripture we're going to read here in Genesis chapter 32, beginning in verse 22. He says, "That night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, 'Let me go, for it is daybreak.' But Jacob replied, 'I will not let you go unless you bless me.' The man asked him, 'What is your name?' 'Jacob,' he answered. Then the man said, 'Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome.' Jacob said, 'Please tell me your name.' But he replied, 'Why do you ask my name?' Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, 'It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared.' The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon." So, under the cloak of night, a little bit of secrecy or whatever, Jacob had his family moved across the river to another location. It says he took his 2 wives, that would be Leah and Rachel, and his 2 female servants, Bilhah and Zilpah. And between the 4 women, he had 11 sons, and they were sent across the river also with them. He also sent his possessions over there, so he was all alone there on one side of the river. And then a man came, and they wrestled, it says, all night long. Now, the battles we have with men and women are real, but the soul struggle is more significant. It happens when God fights his way into our lives. and sometimes God uses strange and mysterious methods. So it was the case for Jacob. For later that night, a man shows up and wrestles with Jacob until the breaking of the day. His identity is not given, but we assume it was God from what is said. However, this poses a problem. The struggle pits the two as being evenly matched, with neither being able to overcome the other. However, just because God doesn't defeat Jacob is not an indication that he can't. The struggle allows us to see Jacob as a man who is determined to be blessed. He did it by trickery in the past, but now he seeks it from God. The struggle enables us to see why God chose Jacob over the firstborn to be the father of a nation. He was no ordinary man. He was God's man from whom a nation would arise. However, our struggles with God are more of a battle within. Before God can greatly bless us, we must surrender entirely to God. So it is true in answering the call to salvation or full-time service. Now, during this wrestling match between Jacob and God, God touches his hip, which then wrenched it out of its socket. And the man said, "Let me go, for it's daybreak." And Jacob refused to do that. He said, "I'm not going to let you go unless you bless me." Now, Jacob's demand does not provide further detail regarding the reason or nature of the request. Perhaps Jacob desired divine blessing as he prepared for his upcoming interaction with his estranged brother Esau. Or perhaps Jacob desired confirmation of the viability of God's promises. The scheming Jacob again sought to swing things in his favor. And during this interaction, the man asked Jacob, said, "What's your name?" And Jacob told him. And in verse 28, the man says, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Now, normally, anytime a name change occurs, it's because it reflects a change in that person, their attitude and the way they live and different things. And we saw Abram had his name changed to Abraham, and now we're seeing Jacob with his name being changed to Israel. Now, Jacob persisted in asking the man his name. The man, maybe a little bit of scolding, he says, "Why do you keep asking my name?" But after that, he did bless Jacob. And because of that, Jacob called the area where they were Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." Now, as morning came, as daybreak entered across the area, the sun rose above him as he left, headed for his confrontation or meeting with Esau, and he was limping because of his hip. So as he left this area, he had a new name. He also had a physical affliction. And although we are created in God's image, sin has damaged us. The result is a world plagued with an ongoing struggle between good and evil and God and Satan. However, when we struggle with God and God wins, we win. Therefore, sometimes a white flag is a wise choice and is better than a victory dance if our surrender is to God, because a loving God always seeks our best. But unfortunately, even when we surrender to God, we still have to battle the flesh, the devil, and the world. But just as God fought with Jacob to bless Jacob, he fights for us to bless us. In our weakness, God's strength makes us strong. In times of need, we only need to look to God's grace, look to God's love, and look to God's power. He will never leave us, he will never reject us, and he will never fail us. And just like Abram, and then in our lesson today, Jacob, had the name change, we must not forget that when we surrendered to Christ, he gave us a new name. We are now called Christians. We are now the children of God and joint heirs with Christ. Furthermore, we have Christ living within us. Therefore, we can be more than conquerors through him who loves us.